not even a good story to tell. Like, it's not even like kind of believable or meaningful. And for somebody who had such an eye for the right things to say and who had done it all right so far, I think maybe Dr. Feelgood had given her a little one too many injections. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Tia Denise. We are going to keep going with the Jacqueline Kennedy story today. And it's going to be a shorter episode. It's my daughter's birthday today, so I don't want to spend too much time working. I want today to be about her. So it's going to be a shorter episode, probably about 30 minutes. You'll recall in the last episode that Jack has died. Bobby meets her at the airport to receive the casket. Nothing weird about that. A brother would be there in that instance. But this is just one more time where they're being bonded in some really traumatic situations. And the reason that I bring this up now is that this comforter that she has found in Bobby is going to be one that she ends up having an affair with. I mean, we get all this talk about how horrifically corrupt JFK was, how he didn't value his marriage, how he didn't value Jackie, how he was just this horrible person who, if he wanted something, he would have it regardless of the vows he had taken. And yet, it is such a brush over when it comes to Jacqueline Kennedy having an affair with her married brother-in-law. You know, it's just sort of, I mean, we talk about it, we will talk about it, but it's like given to us as fact. There's no embroidery done on this particular story the way it's done for the men. And I just think that that is so fraudulent. Jackie Kennedy was up to all kinds of trash, just like John was. And John F. Kennedy had numbers of affairs with married people, and JFK had no care or concern about his wedding vows. But then Jackie didn't really have that much care and concern for other people's wedding vows. The last relationship in her life, which we'll discuss later, was with a married man. She knew he was married. There was no confusion. They were very well settled into their affair. She liked it that way. He could have a family and do his own thing and, you know, be around when she needed him. But it wasn't like this sort of thing where, you know, her autonomy or her independence was going to be infringed upon. So being attached to a married man was really convenient for her. She didn't care that he was married. And just like she didn't care that Bobby Kennedy was married. And why aren't we being way more of a stickler about her sins when we can just stab at JFK's memory and legacy? But then his wife is carrying on the exact same ways he did. And we're just like, well, I mean, you know, it's trauma bonding. That happens sometimes. Such obvious bias. I just like at the beginning of an episode just to lay out for you this sense that we are reading this book with, we're going to start off where we left off, where the body has been brought back to DC and Bobby Kennedy is there. And Jackie Kennedy is in overdrive trying to recreate the legacy of her assassinated husband. So the book says, the 3 days ahead offered Jackie a kind of respite. She could control what happened next. Woe to anyone who dared deny her. The funeral would be broadcast live. 3 days of ceremonies, all Jackie's brainstorm. The men who'd been so deferential to her on Air Force One were now beginning to push back. She wanted a closed coffin. Bobby Kennedy and Bob McNamara insisted it be open. Traditional with heads of state, they said, as if the First Lady hadn't known. Well, in that case, Jackie said, why don't you all take a look at him and tell me that you think an open casket is a dignified choice? One by one, members of the Kennedy inner circle looked and agreed. Jackie was right. Jack, in her words, looked like one of Madame Trousseau's wax dummies. She was in fighting form, amped up on adrenaline and speed. Yeah, and that's not like a euphemism. That was another secret between her and Jack, their confidential appointments with Max Jacobson, the German physician they called Dr. Feelgood. He shot them up with all kinds of drugs, speed, steroids, painkillers, animal hormones, bone marrow, human placenta. Neither Jack nor Jackie knew what exactly was in Feelgood's injections. I don't care if it's horse piss, Jack once said. It works. The good doctor flew to D.C. as soon as he heard, but nothing could knock Jackie out. All that scotch on Air Force One hadn't made her sleepy, nor were the sedatives the White House doctors injected her with at night working. She felt as if she was being tossed about in an ocean of giant waves, endlessly fighting to break the surface. Who would take care of her, her children? Where would she live? What would she do? What would become of them? What happened to all that Kennedy money? It isn't as though she'd done anything to denigrate her reputation so that the Kennedy family would have to distance themselves from her. Yet. I mean, that comes later. But at this point, I mean, would they not have taken her in? She's received $1 million payout from her father-in-law to stay with Jack. You know, obviously he's got some money. And obviously he would want to raise his grandchildren, or, if Joe's dead, I can't remember if Joe's dead at this point. But the family would obviously want to raise JFK's kids to great heights as a way of sustaining their father's legacy. They wouldn't just toss these people out into the cold. Like, what is she really worried about? Jackie threw herself into planning Jack's funeral. What she wanted would normally take weeks to execute. She made it happen within hours. Jack's casket would be drawn by a riderless horse out of the White House Drive and down Pennsylvania Avenue, on the same casket that had carried Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Jack would be buried at Arlington, their lost babies disinterred and buried alongside him, an eternal flame lighting their graves. That idea had come to her from visiting the tomb of the unknown soldier. Bill Walton, the abstract expressionist painter and a friend of Jack and Jackie's, advised against it. Aesthetically unfortunate, he told her. She ignored him. He was hardly composed enough as it was. Bill, she told him, please, pull yourself together. You've got to help me get through the funeral. Both of us must be strong. The flowers, Jackie said, were to be simple, nothing overwrought, no purples or golds, and for God's sake no wreaths at the grave. Her great friend, Bunny Mellon, the famed horticulturist who had helped Jackie design the White House Rose Garden, was put in charge of that. When Patrick died, Jackie told her, you sent such a nice, simple basket, so there's one thing I want at the grave, a straw basket with just the flowers he had in the rose garden. That garden was another aspect of beauty that Jackie had awakened in him. When they returned from that triumphant state visit to France, Jack had looked out the Oval Office and wondered why the White House had nothing comparable to the great gardens of Paris and Luxembourg. Only those flowers, Jackie had told Bunny, and nothing else at the grave. Jackie would lead the funeral procession, walking the quarter-mile from the White House to the church behind Jack's flag-draped casket. The Secret Service was alarmed. Jackie was a target now, too. No one knew if the assassination was part of a larger national threat. The United States could not put foreign heads of state or dignitaries in harm's way. Fine, Jackie said. She was walking with Jack. She would do it alone if it came to that, but she was pretty sure it wouldn't. Because really, how would it look for this young widow to be left walking alone, showing more courage than the most powerful men on earth? They can ride or do whatever they want to, Jackie said. And no fat black Cadillacs either, she said. It's too ugly. Everything was to be sleek and geometric, clean and purposeful. Jackie had her eye not just toward history but iconography. The young widow, standing with her fatherless children, normally so shielded from the public eye, on the north portico of the White House, leading the nation in this funeral march, clutching the folded American flag at her husband's grave, lighting the eternal flame. Their 2-year-old son, his father's namesake, stepping forward and paying tribute with a salute. Her husband's death could not be in vain. His funeral would be this first step in consecrating his memory as she saw fit. This wasn't only about history. This was to enshrine their marriage, her love for him, and his for her, as sacred and true. She demanded pomp and pageantry. She was going to transform the country's trauma, the violent death of a young president, into something regal and majestic. Jackie was striking a near impossible balance of grandeur and minimalism, pathos without mawkishness. America would show the world that this young nation could survive anything, with Jackie leading the way. Well, I applaud her ability to stay calm and cool under such emotional ravages. I continue to find it strange that one could be so, I don't know, maybe, okay, here's the thing. My strengths do not lie in the visual arts. I've been attacked roundly for the background in, like, back here, because people say it's trashy and junky or whatever. But I like it. And so, it's easy for me to not completely understand exactly what her vision was or how she saw it so clearly under such traumatic circumstances. But if you were used to looking at the world as, how do I beautify this? How do I make this look good? Her strength was, as she said, she wanted to be, and she joked about it, but it ended up being true. She wanted to be the art director of the 20th century. And that's because she had an eye for what looked good. And so for me, I don't resonate with the ability to be so clear-headed that I'd be like, I don't want any cars around that I don't think look good. It needs to be cars that I think look good. Like, I wouldn't even notice. I wouldn't even think about that. Like, that just wouldn't even be in my mind. I wouldn't be able to see that. So for me, I don't connect with this, and it almost feels weird to me, a little bit cold, that you could be so forward-thinking. But if that is the way that she dealt with, all of her feelings, by being very intentional and detail-oriented, what is it for me? It isn't for me to say, oh, that's really weird. That's very odd. Like, why is she acting like that? It's really cold. Because It's not cold if that's the way she'd always been, and clearly that was how she'd always been. She had always known what looked good and gone out of her way to make it happen. Why would she not do that with the death of her husband? That's the way she functions. It would be the most natural thing in the world to funnel your anxieties into a way that you knew how to behave. Before the funeral was about to begin, Jackie stood among the guests in the stateroom and looked around. Not another woman to be found. Jackie's mother Janet, so often disapproving, wasn't surprised by her daughter's unerring flourishes amid quick decision-making. Jackie has a great sense of the dramatic, she said. Janet couldn't find a thing to criticize. Jackie had only one black dress, and it was one that she'd worn to Eleanor Roosevelt's funeral and for John Jr.'s christening. She would wear it now for Jack. Her maid was told to buy 3 pairs of sheer black stockings and a black veil. Not the mantillas that Jackie wore to church, but a full veil that would obscure but not conceal her face. This was the first time Jackie would draw a curtain between herself and the public. There was the Jackie before, the first lady who favored bright, solid colors or plumage so people could see her, and the Jackie after. She didn't know who that was yet, but she knew the mother she would need to become. Caroline and John wouldn't be just the children of a former president, mildly interesting relics of a past administration. They would be living legacies requiring an upbringing that she would need to invent as she went along. But first, Jackie needed to get her small children through the next few days. It was a task even more daunting than helping the country through its grief. She hadn't been able to bear the thought of telling the children. When she heard that the Secret Service had taken them from the White House on the night of the assassination, she was enraged. They were so little, she said, they needed to be in their own beds, surrounded by the things and the people they loved. It was left to their nanny, Maud Shaw, to break the news, telling 5-year-old Caroline that her daddy had gone to heaven to be with baby Patrick, who had been so lonely. Caroline cried so hard that Shaw feared she would choke. John's 3rd birthday would coincide with the funeral, and Jackie was determined that her son would still have a party. He was too young to understand what was happening. He thought his father had flown away on his special helicopter. Oh, this is so hard, so sad. I hate this for the kids. I hate it so bad. They could not understand. 5 and almost 3? Poor Maud Shaw having to tell the kids that. I don't relish her job. Now, Jackie had Caroline and John write a letter to their father. She would do the same, writing 5 tear-stained pages addressed to my darling Jack. It was an exorcism of sorts, Jackie expressing herself like the writer she was. To others, she spoke of only 2 things, what had happened in Dallas and what she wanted for the funeral. No one, not even Bobby, could draw her out on her emotions. And so the letter she would leave with Jack in his coffin was as much for her as him. She had survived the loss of baby Patrick, she wrote, only because of Jack. She wrote of what she had said to him soon after, that she now knew she could suffer anything except losing Jack. The blow, she wrote, I could not bear. Yet here she was, bearing it. Within days of the assassination, having also written to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, reassuring him that Lyndon Johnson would seek the peace and nuclear détente that her husband had worked for, Jackie wrote to a newly widowed young mother of 3, Marie Tippett. Her husband, a police officer named J.D. Tippett, had been shot to death while trying to arrest Jack's assassin. Marie had lost her husband to the very same killer on the very same day, yet J.D.'s sacrifice had already been lost to history. Marie, of course, was thinking of Jackie too, the only other person on earth who could empathize with the sudden, surreal loss of a husband this way. Yet the handwritten condolence letter Marie received on plain white paper, dated November 30th, 1963, came as a shock. Jackie wrote that she thought of Marie constantly, that if there was anything Jackie could do for her, ever, Marie had only to ask, and that she knew Marie's sorrow and loss were as deep as her own. Jackie wrote, "You know I lit a flame for Jack at Arlington that will burn forever. I consider that it burns for your husband too, and so will everyone who ever sees it." That's so considerate. That is some top-notch classy behavior. That she would not be so absorbed in her own grief, but that she would reach out. And, the cynical person would say, oh, well, she just hoped that would get out. She wanted people to think she was that sort of person. But I choose not to think of it that way. Because if you had lost your husband on that day and knew that nobody could understand, why wouldn't you reach out to somebody who you knew could marginally understand the pain that you were experiencing? It would feel less lonely to know that there was somebody who could kind of understand. Even if you never visited with them or you didn't need to become fast friends, to at least reach out to somebody who that day had changed everything for them too, would be of some comfort. When the funeral was over, Jackie greeted the mourners back at the White House with warmth and stoicism. She spoke at length with French President de Gaulle. Then she went upstairs to her son's birthday party. "I couldn't disappoint little John," she said. She found Britain's Prince Philip playing on the floor with him, and the image was almost too much. No title, no hierarchy or power structure could impede anyone from comforting and distracting a newly fatherless little boy who had just turned 3. Well done, Prince Philip. Isn't it interesting how all these books overlap in one way or another? I mean, I guess we are talking about the elite of the world, so wouldn't it overlap? But it is always sort of fun to see what feels a bit like a guest appearance. With the funeral behind her, Jackie's most urgent task lay ahead. One day, before burying her husband, she had told Pierre Salinger, one of Jack's most trusted advisors, of her new life's mission. "I have only one thing to do," Jackie said. "I have to take care of these kids. I have to make sure they grow up well. They have to get intelligent. They have to move forward to get good jobs. They have to have a whole, very important life, because if I don't do that for them, they'll spend all their time looking back at their father's death. And that's what they shouldn't be doing." Jackie was nothing if not a student of history, and she was not about to leave Jack's legacy to strangers or outsiders. No. Jacqueline Kennedy was going to author this particular draft of American Consequence. The funeral, Jackie knew, had served its purpose. But it wasn't, could not be, the end of the story. The chronicle of her husband's short administration had yet to be written. What had happened in Dallas, she knew, should not be the end. It had to be the beginning. No one would expect her to talk so soon. No one, not even their close friend Ben Bradley, then a journalist with Newsweek, had dared to ask Jackie for an interview. She didn't want to give him the exclusive anyway. Ben was always covering for Jack's affairs. Theodore White, though, he had written The Making of the President 1960, the definitive account of Jack's campaign. Jack had admired him, and the feeling was mutual. White would cast Jack in the best posthumous light. So 1 week after the assassination, and the day after Thanksgiving, Life magazine already on the stands with its JFK memorial issue, Jackie, in retreat at the Kennedy compound, summoned White. She had reached White by phone that morning in New York City, cold calling him as he sat in a dentist's chair. He couldn't get to the Cape fast enough. So, again, going into overdrive, very concerned that his legacy should be taken care of. And I feel like, and I said this in the last episode, part of the hurry to do so was because she knew that he had been a fraudulent individual, that people had believed such a false version of who he really was. Even down to the fact that people thought he was a healthy person, but he really wasn't. And not that there's anything against somebody who's suffering with their health, but I'm just saying on every conceivable level, he had produced an image of himself that could crumble in death if she didn't hurry up and make sure that people had this crisp, clear idea of what they were supposed to think of him. And the only person who could do that was Jackie. If she can remain faithful as the wife and let everybody know that, oh, he was this really great, wonderful person, and then, we had the best marriage in the whole world, and it was truly a Camelot type experience, it's going to seem very tacky for people to, in his death, and in the light of his wife's words, pull up all of this negative stuff about him and his affairs and his womanizing, etc., etc. But it took a long time for people to really be honest about who he was. And I really don't feel like people were honest about who he was until she had died. Anyway, Jackie greeted White at 8:30 that night, tall and proud in her chic casual wear, camel-colored cigarette pants and black sweater, her hair impeccable, her eyes clear. Her composure was in stark contrast to the rainstorm raging outside, and this played to her sense of theatricality. Jackie thrived in a crisis, grew calm and still. This was something she hadn't known about herself before. How could she not know that about herself? Her entire life with Jackie's been one crisis after another in which she's had to remain still and calm. Jackie sat on the sofa. White joined her. She was going to lead out, but White felt as if he were in control. She leaned forward, tilted herself toward him, made herself seem vulnerable, open. Yeah, the operative word there is seem. "What shall I say?" Jackie asked him softly. "What can I do for you?" Jackie already knew everything she would and would not say. "Well, how do you want him remembered?" White asked. Off she went, talking first about herself. "I'm not going to be the Widder Kennedy in public," Jackie said. "When this is over, I'm going to crawl into the deepest retirement." She told White what had happened in the car after Jack was shot. She spoke of the hysterical men, Jack's aides and the priest in the hospital, of her regret at cleaning her bloody face and hair with a Kleenex. Now she was still wearing Jack's wedding band and twisted it around her finger as she chain-smoked. She showed White the emerald ring that Jack had given her to honor baby Patrick. She knew the kind of color and detail a journalist craved. She would give these things to White in exchange for what she wanted. Her rage at two prominent columnists who had been critical of her husband, hammering at his great failures in foreign policy and race relations, gave way to her fear that he would be remembered poorly, if at all. Jackie could not allow that. Every time we got off the plane that day, Jackie told White, 3 times they gave me the yellow rose of Texas. But in Dallas they gave me red roses. And I thought, how funny, red roses. So all the seat was full of blood and red roses. Jackie knew that people were curious about her, but she spoke only of what she would not do, what she did not want. I'm not going around accepting plaques, she said. I don't want medals for Jack. I don't want to go out on a Kennedy driveway to a Kennedy airport to visit a Kennedy school. I don't want to be seen by crowds. Jackie said she was going to focus on raising her children. She did not know where they would live yet, but it would not be in their old Georgetown townhouse. That night in Bethesda, she said, as Jack's autopsy was being performed, she thought to herself, how can I go back there to that bedroom? And I said to myself, you must never forget Jack, but you mustn't be morbid. White took notes, longhand, scribbling furiously as Jackie spoke uninterrupted. He had barely asked a question. She was so focused, so sure of herself, even as she acted so helpless. There's this one thing I wanted to say, Jackie said. I'm so ashamed of myself. Jack, everything he ever quoted was Greek or Roman. It wasn't. This was the dramatist in Jackie, flowering as she soliloquized. And let me just, put a pause on the story real quick. While I can completely see where she was coming from with the funeral, and while I am not clear-headed enough to think about the clean lines and the geometrical beauty of a funeral, I would just be like so distraught. I would not be able to think about how it was visually appealing to people. But that's okay. That's how she was. I get that. This I am really bothered by. And to me, this is like another level of control freak, because to say something as dumb as everything Jack ever quoted was Roman or Greek, to just sort of make him seem like this noble statesman, this high-minded intellect, which he was really smart. But you don't need to cut down who he really was and substitute it for this person that he wasn't, when I don't think anybody would say that Jack Kennedy was an idiot. I think people generally understand that he was, well-educated and could speak clearly, and he had some, formed ideas, and, he was articulate. If she had wanted to call this historian to highlight all of his good traits, and hopefully stamp down the bad ones, that's fine. But to recreate the man and call that his legacy, to me, that's disrespectful of who he was. To me, that's wrong. When somebody dies, you don't sit there and talk about all the bad things about them. And certainly no one would expect her to come forward and be like, well, let me tell you about his womanizing. Nobody expected that to happen. But don't recreate the person. Don't erase them. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Highlight their good things. Don't erase who they were. Because we're going to go on to talk more about this. It's not just because she said he quoted Greek and Roman only when that wasn't true. The book goes on to say that this was a dramatist in Jackie, flowering as she soliloquized. No, don't protect me now, Jackie told White, by acting as though what she was about to say was personal, that she was so carried away that she was divulging information that she would never have otherwise said. She knew that White would print it. One thing kept going through my mind, she said, the line from a musical comedy. I kept saying to Bobby, I've got to talk to somebody. I've got to see somebody. I want to say this one thing. It's been almost an obsession with me. This line from the musical comedy has been almost an obsession with me. At night, before going to bed, we had an old Victrola, and he'd play a couple of records. I'd get out of bed at night and play it for him when it was so cold getting out of bed. It was a song he loved. He loved Camelot. It was the song he loved most at the end. It's the last record, the last side of Camelot. Sad Camelot. The line is, don't let it be forgot that for one brief shining moment, there was Camelot. See, that is called overplaying your hand, y'all. That was a hot mess of stupidity. And that's what White thought, too. White knew this was patently untrue. Everyone who knew Jack Kennedy did. This was not a man who'd been given to poetry or romance or middle-brow Broadway musicals, much less someone who employed such heavy-handed metaphor. Jack Kennedy wasn't the kind of husband who was home with his wife every night, let alone sharing the same bed and cozying up to the Victrola. White looked at the questions he had written, questions concerned with pragmatism and history, none of which Jackie had any interest in answering. Religion? Vision for the country? Did he like the job? None of those things were things she wanted. She just was here to tell you this, quite frankly, syrupy, vapid version of events. That's not even a good story to tell. It's not even kind of believable or meaningful. And for somebody who had such an eye for the right things to say, and who had done it all right so far, I think maybe Dr. Feelgood had given her a little one too many injections. Because that is the lamest way to end your husband's legacy. That the thing that like he was obsessed with and that you were obsessed with was this line from a musical comedy called Camelot. And the line is, "Don't let it be forgot that for one brief shining moment there was Camelot." It's so stupid, so meaningless. And for somebody who was so intelligent, and she was, I can only assume that the grief and the drugs had blinded her as to how to tell this particular story. At midnight, Jackie showed White to the maid's room, where he set to work on his first draft. Life was holding the presses for this Jackie exclusive, literally at the cost of $30,000 per hour. He had made another note to himself to write simply, yet he could not resist leading with the imagery of this dark and rainy night, citing the poet Verlaine on the, quote, sobbing of the autumn, rhapsodizing over Jackie's wide brown eyes in thoughtful stillness. When he was done, White handed Jackie his draft. She began cutting mercilessly, striking out entire passages. This was the deal. Life got the exclusive if she got the final edit. So instead of White's confusing and banal original lead, it was raining the day he returned to Washington. There had been a brief few days of sun and blue on the East Coast. Jackie insisted that Wife's third graph, a knockout, become the lead. It should now begin. She remembered how hot the sun had been in Dallas. Yes, that put the reader right there, in the back of the car with Jackie just before the first shot. It was compelling, intimate, and foreboding. And other memories, very private and frightening, White had written, but mostly how all through the night they had tried to separate him from her, to sedate her, and to take care of her. Jackie did not like that. She struck out "and to take care of her," writing she would not let them sedate her. A lachrymose line about Jackie wearing Jack's wedding ring, the closest thing she had for memory of him, she said, letting the fingers of the right hand close the left, was cut out too. She wanted this piece moving at a fast clip until it reached the mythological ending she'd crafted for Jack. Sometime close to 2 a.m., White called his editors in New York and dictated the final draft from our kitchen. Jackie stood over him to ensure that her version, word for word, would be the published one. She was right to do so. She listened as White pushed back tensely, his editors calling the Camelot stuff overwrought, untrue, laughable. Jackie looked at White and shook her head back and forth. It was her version or nothing. And so the first draft of history won out, the very last line, the kicker, written in her own black slanted cursive. For one brief shining moment, there was Camelot. That fairy tale would captivate America for decades to come, at the cost of many more women. What, in hindsight, had she wrought? That's where we have to end today. Like I said, I have to kind of close it off a little bit earlier. It's my daughter's 13th birthday, so we're going to celebrate today. So I don't want to spend all this time editing and all that kind of stuff. But the next time we read, that won't be the last episode because it's a long chapter, but that's when she meets Onassis. That was a fated meeting from the beginning. And I didn't know much about him at all. I never knew anything about him. She thought that her husband was a disgusting animal. She had yet to meet the devil. Jack apparently was only one of the devil's minions. But she is going to really fall backwards into the greatest mess of her life when she joins up with that Joker. So that chapter is probably the most explosive of this entire story. So there's that. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for joining. Bye.